To make a simple Pong game inside of Scratch, you will need 3 sprites, 2 for the paddles and 1 for the ball. You can either make a custom sprite from the paint section of this sprite creation dropdown, or you can use one from the templates that Scratch provides. Let's take a look at the Player 1 sprite paddle. So once the game starts, we want to enable controls for the player to move the paddle up and down to adjust for the ball moving and be able to bounce the ball off of it. So we are going to go to the Events tab and add a When Flag is Clicked. And underneath that, we are going to add a Forever block. This will allow us to have an infinite loop of checking for certain conditions or key presses as the game goes on. So once we have this infinite loop set up, we can check to see if the players are clicking any keyboard inputs to respond with movement to. So I'm going to add 2 if blocks here, and then I'm going to go over to the sensing blocks and add a key press sense and put it in that hexagonal block. Now I'm going to go to the drop down and hit up arrow key. So now we're infinitely looping inside of this forever loop, but whenever an up arrow key is pressed, we will do whatever is inside this loop. So if we go to motions, change Y by, and something like 5 is a pretty good number for what we're doing. Once the green flag is pressed, it'll wait till we hit the up arrow key. And if we hit the up arrow key, it'll move the paddle upwards. Right now, we haven't hooked anything up for the down arrow key, so let's go ahead and do that. We can drag this over here, right-click it, and hit duplicate, and plop it in the other block. If we replace this with down arrow, and do the same for the change Y by block, and set this to -5, we now have controls for both up and down. Let's quickly add the same controls to the red sprite. A fast way to do this is to take this whole block and drag it over to the player 2. Now if we click on player 2, we'll see we have the same controls. Right now, the way it's hooked up, will move both paddles, which is not what we want. A simple way to change this is to give different controls for different players. Since the red player is on the right side, I'll use the arrow keys, but since the blue player is on the left side, I will use some regular letter keys like W and S as a common one. Now if we hit play, we can move the red paddle up and down with the arrow keys, and the blue paddle up and down with W and S. Now we need to add physics and a script to the ball so that it can begin to bounce back and forth. So if we click on the ball, we are going to start with the same type of block. So when flag is clicked, begin to loop forever, and instead of checking for input, because nobody should be able to directly control the ball, we are going to have it just start moving continuously. So if we put in move, let's do 3 steps, the ball will begin to move. And it won't stop because we haven't programmed it to do anything at this point. But as you can see, if we hit the go button again, the ball will still be there. So let's put in something to help reset the ball. So if before the forever loop we put in a go to 0, 0 block from the motions tab, then it will go to the middle of the screen every time we start the game. Now we need to randomize the direction that the ball is going to go. Since we are using the move steps tool, the ball will be moving in the direction that it's facing. So if we give it a random rotation, then it should go in a random direction. So if we point in direction, once again before the forever block, and we could hard code in something. So if we hard coded in -90, it shows us which direction it'll go. It will go that way. But we want it to be something different every time. So what we can do is go to the operators section and grab the pick random tool. Inside here, let's put -180 and 180. This is all the possible directions that Scratch has built in. If we drop it in there, every time we hit the go button, the ball will go in a different direction. The last thing we need to do is add a bouncing mechanic for the ball. Inside the forever loop, once the ball begins moving, we can do this by putting in a condition. And instead of using a keyboard input, we are going to sense if touching from the sensing tab. Let's start with the edge. So when it touches the edge, we want it to simply change its direction and continue moving. So all we have to do is add another point in directions. Now, once again, we don't want it to point in the same direction every time it bounces. And we also don't want it to necessarily bounce in a random direction, but we can take a look to see what that would look like. So if we had the game go and have it go in a random direction, that wouldn't seem to work out pretty well. And I'll move this speed up. It's not exactly going to work out. A good, pretty realistic solution to this is taking the current position. So if we go down here and take this direction block, this is a number that changes as the game goes that is just the direction of the ball at any given time. And if we go back to the operators and add a plus tool, we can make a new number that's some sort of expression of different things. So if we put direction in one end and 180 in the other, this is basically saying at any given time, this whole block is the number that is the opposite direction of whatever the ball is facing at the given moment. And if we set its direction to the direction that's opposite of it, it will bounce and turn around and make a 180. So there is something off a little bit. It shouldn't be bouncing like that. So let's try a different value. Let's try 90. There we go. Okay. -90 should... Okay, I think a small problem you can see occasionally on the bounce, because the center point of the ball is not quite in the center of the ball, it'll do this double bouncing thing. But for the most part, it should work out. So this is a good script for now. One more thing we can do is have the ball bounce off of the paddles whenever it touches the paddles as well. So if we go over to the operations tab and drag out the OR, and let's get 2 of them so that we can chain together 3 different possibilities. So one thing that should cause it to bounce is hitting the edge. Another thing, if we go back to sensing and touching, the other thing should be the paddles. So let's go in player 1 and player 2. Now it bounces whenever the paddles hit it. So right now you have the simple physics of a Pong game set up. In a later video I'll show how you can add scoring and how you can have a bit more randomization. As you can see, this is pretty dull at the moment and depends on the first bounce, and there's a few glitches, but this is the basic mechanics and teaches you about the physics and simple scripting and infinite loops.